There are generally three different accepted methods of payment for truck drivers today. There's hourly pay, there's mileage pay, and there's percentage pay. In this video, I'm going to talk about the latter two, mileage and percentage pay, and which of the two I'd recommend.
Hey there, big strappers. It's about that time of the video where I tell you guys about how this video is sponsored by GP Transco. They are a mid-sized carrier out of Illinois, and they are the third highest paying carrier in the nation currently. They hire out of all states and run in all states. If you want to get paid well while being treated with respect, check them out at their website at gptransco.com or give them a call now.
A little history first to give you a bit of background to help your understanding of it all. When I started trucking back in the 70s, percentage pay was the preferred method of payment for most drivers. Mileage pay back then was based on what they called the Household Movers Guide, and it was notoriously low and inaccurate. Freight haulers ran on the Household Movers Guide, but drivers generally accepted the fact that percentage pay at that time was better. The freight rates were high relatively compared to the fuel prices, so guys were making better money at it. Drivers could easily figure out by dividing their odometer readings into the rate they were being offered as to whether or not they were making good money. Experienced drivers generally knew already the distances between Chicago and Dallas or Dallas and Los Angeles, so it was pretty easy for them to figure out how much money they were making. But of course, as with everything else, all things change, and the system for tracking mileage began to improve with technological developments. Technology developed the GPS tracking systems, and it made it far easier to determine mileage points and distances from point of pickup to point of delivery. And not only did companies have the technology now to find out exactly how far those distance points were, the drivers also were able to purchase technology through their little GPSs to find out exactly how far it was from point A to point B. In the meantime, load brokers had begun to get a better grip on the freight industry, and they clued into the percentage system and how to milk it and defraud it. So what load brokers began to do, and it's the essence of the problem today with the load brokers, is they would skim off the top and skim off the bottom and then present the load to the truck driver. And the way they did this was the shipper would offer the load broker a load for $3,500. The load broker would take $500 right off the top, then show the truck driver the rate of $3,000. The truck driver would accept this rate, and then the load broker would take 10%, or what they claimed was 10%, out of that rate. So they were double dipping. They were taking money off the top of the rate, they were taking money off the bottom of the rate, and the rate just began to shrink for the truck drivers, load brokers, and hence the rally in Washington not too long ago, and hence President Trump announcing that the Department of Justice would be doing an investigation on load brokers. But that's a story for another time. In the meantime, truck drivers became disillusioned with the percentage system because they knew they were being burned. Now, good carriers, always looking for good drivers, realized that the mileage system was the way to go. More drivers wanted to be paid by the mile, so the big carriers put together good mileage pay packages, and the drivers began to move to these good carriers offering a mileage rate. Now, this is not to say that some unscrupulous carriers didn't figure out how to mess with the mileage rate to skim money out of the rate. And what they would do is they would take the distance between point A and point B and shrink the mileage. And we in the industry used to call this global shrinkage. And we used to laugh and joke that suddenly Chicago had gotten a whole lot closer to Detroit or Dallas in the last few years, because that's what they were doing. But they would get away with it. And I knew guys that lost thousands because they simply trusted the carrier to give them an honest mileage rate and not check their paperwork against their odometer readings to see if they were getting paid for all their miles. And that's how this carriers skimmed the mileage rate. But at the end of the day, it was much easier for drivers to track their pay through the mileage system rather than the percentage system, because with the percentage system, they didn't then and they still don't get to see all the true and accurate numbers. And that's part of what the Department of Justice is fighting for now and investigating. But at the end of the day, the mileage rate system became the lesser of the two evils because it was easier to track, and that's why these days, right now, I would recommend mileage pay over percentage pay. Now, that's not to say also that there aren't some good carriers out there still using percentage pay, like Mercer out of Kentucky. They're an honest carrier, their owner-operators are doing well. Percentage still works if everyone's honest about it, and it's a good system. But most load brokers and a lot of carriers corrupted that system to the point where mileage is the better way to go these days. So, the pros of percentage pay: if you're working for a good carrier in a really good niche, you can make some pretty serious money. That's the biggest pro of percentage. On the downside, you don't get paid your empty miles. A lot of carriers will try to milk you into doing favors for them when you're not under a load, like moving trailers around or something like that. And there's always the chance that you're getting scammed with percentage pay, and it's virtually impossible to accurately track it because you can't get the paperwork out of the original shipper to find out what the original rate was supposed to be. Pros and cons for the mileage rate. Mileage rate, you get paid for all your miles, not just your loaded miles. But the cons are that you've got to track your miles, pay attention to it, and match it up to your pay statements to make sure you're not getting beat. At the end of the day then, I'd recommend going with the mileage rate rather than percentage because it's the lesser of two evils. It's just easier to patrol, it's easier to check, it's easier to make sure you're being paid what you should be paid. Now let me tell you a quick percentage story that I remember from back in the day. I was heading west and I ran into a buddy, and he had just started working percentage, and he was hauling a tanker, a liquid tanker. He was going to Seattle. And I don't remember the accurate numbers back then. It was a long time ago, but I believe they offered him $5,000 to go from Toronto to Seattle. So his mileage rate was about $2 a mile, which back then in the 80s, that was considered pretty good money, $2 a mile. So he was pretty happy. Off he went to Seattle at $2 a mile. But I didn't run into him there for a while, and after about a month or so, I ran into him. I said, "Man, are you still making that big money?" He says, "Well," he says, "I ran out to Seattle for $2 a mile. I sat there for a week for nothing. And then they brought me empty all the way back from Seattle to Toronto. And right away, that $2 a mile load becomes $1 a mile because he has to come all the way back empty. Then they tried to sack him for a $700 trailer wash. So you've really got to watch the numbers or they'll play you to the bone. Trucking can be a dirty business sometimes. Take care, keep the rubber side down. We'll see you on the back haul.